The video game series Grand Theft Auto has been described as a satirical mirror of the American dream. A game drenched in violence, crime, and capitalist excess. It's a virtual reality where you get to be a gangster, you get to rob banks, you get to steal cars, and you get to engage in colossal gunfights with private security forces. But what's the history behind the America that GTA presents? How accurate are the game's depictions of gang violence, police brutality, and government corruption? These are the questions we're going to answer on this week's episode of History's Devils. Hello, folks, and welcome to History's Devils, a podcast journey through the lives of murderers, charlatans, psychopaths, and shitheels. A podcast journey to which hopefully you all are subscribing, liking, commenting, leaving star ratings, and the like. That's my cheap plug out of the way. I promise I won't do any more. That's it for now. My name is James Crossland, and as became evident in a previous episode of History's Devils, when we discussed the Red Dead Redemption franchise, I am a fan of video games where you get to run around a highly detailed digital rendering of the United States firing a gun and committing crimes. This does not make me peculiar, because I share this interest with about 450 million other people across this planet, who since the Grand Theft Auto game franchise started in 1997, my God, way back in 1997, 450 million people at least have purchased subsequent entries into this video game series, earning its creators, Rockstar Studios, in excess of $11 billion. This monumental success of GTA is not simply because of the over-top violence in these games, which is admittedly a part of the appeal, but each of these GTA games has successfully satirized and offered quite biting at times political commentary on different eras of America's recent history, from the neon excesses of 1980s Miami to the grim anxiety and paranoia of post 9/11 New York, to the Los Angeles of the early 1990s, where race, crime, and police brutality took center stage in popular imaginations and in reality on people's TV screens. This extra layer of the history and politics of the GTA series has drawn the attention of many researchers, and I have one with me today to talk through the history of this extraordinary video game franchise. Bob Whitaker, welcome to History's Devils.
Thanks for having me, James.
How did you get into looking at video games as a source, as something that we can draw history from?
Yeah, well, I've always been a video game player. And as a young historian in graduate school, I began to notice that the games I was playing were touching upon serious historical topics. And I think I saw that first with the Assassin's Creed series. And some of the strategy games like Sid Meier's Civilization, and then the strategy games coming out of Paradox Studio like Hearts of Iron. And as far as Grand Theft Auto, after playing some of the more historical games like Assassin's Creed, I noticed that a lot of the Grand Theft Auto series is also depicting different historical eras. And so I was fascinated with how pop culture is depicting history, and how that is done with video games. How do video games change that depiction because it's interactive, right, rather than just being kind of a passive medium? And so, Grand Theft Auto, I think, being the most popular game series in history, and so much of it being historical, really grabbed my attention. And so I've been looking at these games for many years, as you said, 1997. And then I think the historical titles for GTA started shortly thereafter. So there's a lot of history covered in those games.
Yeah. And it's sobering for a man in his 40s like myself to think about it as history, because I look at a lot of this stuff and I'm like, well, this is a lived reality. But yeah, when you actually break it down, look at the different games, you see so many different epochs. There are, I think, about 15, maybe 16 Grand Theft Auto games in the franchise. There's a lot. Yeah. But we don't want to be here all day. So for the purposes of brevity, I'm going to focus our discussion on the two GTA games that are set in LA, they being 2004's GTA San Andreas and 2013's GTA 5. We'll surely touch on the upcoming GTA 6 at some point as well, but I want to focus on the LA games. And for those uninitiated, just a quick overview of what I'm talking about here. So Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is a game that is set in 1992 in a fictionalized version of California, which is San Andreas. You play through a variety of violent escapades in 3 cities: Los Santos, which is Los Angeles, San Fierro, which is San Francisco, and Las Venturas, which is Las Vegas. You've also got Area 51 thrown in there just for the hell of it, and the Nevada desert. They cover a lot. Like geographically, there's a lot to play with. You play a young black male named Carl Johnson, or CJ as he's known in the game, who is a gang member. CJ has a good side to him. He's trying to help out his family, trying to keep drugs out of his neighborhood, but criminality is essential to the gameplay. You kill a lot of people. You murder cops, you blow things up, you break into people's houses. There's even a dedicated side game where you burgle people's houses. Committing crimes is the essence of the game, but so too is American culture. You know, it's about acquiring bigger, more deadly guns from the comedically rendered ammunition gun shops that are peppered throughout the game. Eating terrible fast food at Burger Shot, which is like Burger King, Cluck and Bell, which is KFC or Taco Bell. Making money by whatever means necessary. You buy properties to further criminal enterprise. You work for crime bosses. And as the title of the game series suggests, you also steal a hell of a lot of cars, to the point where it's second nature. It's kind of built into the game that you just jack a car when you feel like getting somewhere. It's all fun, but beneath the fun, there's a grim underlying premise to both GTA San Andreas and to all GTA games. And that's the fact that you, as the protagonist, whether it's CJ or any of the other protagonists in the games, you are playing through a dark side of the American dream, where the ultimate goal is to earn as much money as possible, be as successful as possible, and do so in this very independent, self-determined way, defying the law, the state, committing crimes because that's just what you need to do. You do it all with a gun in hand. And I guess the fundamental question is, who are the people who developed Grand Theft Auto, and what has informed this very dark, criminal, violent vision of America that they've depicted over the years?
Yeah, well, the developers of Grand Theft Auto are 2 brothers from London, Sam and Dan Houser. Sam is the eldest brother, and he's kind of I guess we could call him the producer of the game series, more focused on the business side, more focused on the technical aspects of game development. And then Dan, the younger brother, he's really more interested in writing and narrative. So when you think of, as you mentioned, the kind of wit and sarcasm and, this kind of approach to American life, that's really Dan Houser coming out. And so these 2, born and raised in London, they live near a video store in London. So when you're talking about where does this kind of sarcastic view of American life come from, it comes from American films and film culture. And so these 2 brothers living in London, kind of developing their keen interest in American life and American culture, went on to work for a game design company based in Scotland called DMA Design. And they started working on this game called Race and Chase, which was essentially a cops and robbers game, which Sam and Dan essentially took over development of and turned into the first Grand Theft Auto game in 1997. And so when we think of this series, you really have to start with the brothers, the Houser brothers. But of course, the kind of grit work of developing this game occurs at DMA Design's original studio, which is now called Rockstar North in Edinburgh, Scotland. So this is very much a UK production. The Grand Theft Auto series is a UK kind of born and bred series, which makes it fascinating for me. I'm an American who has a PhD in British history. And so looking at Brits, looking at America, it feels...
Transatlantic confusion.
Exactly. It feels very natural to me to be interested in this.
These guys, in some respects, as you're telling their story, they are part of the long tradition of folks who exist to this day of Brits who look across the pond and just kind of go, what the fuck? Like what is this, basically? And to be frank, look down their nose quite a bit. I mean, if I had a penny for every British person I've met who has never been to the United States and yet has decided that they know everything about how messed up it is and all the bad stuff and everything else, I would have, I don't know, several pounds, because there are a lot of these people who have that view. And it is interesting because, I mean, it's hard to avoid that view based on not just television, but the things you see in the news and everything else, and the fact that America is omnipresent in Western culture writ large. But at the same time, it is always curious to me that a lot of times I wonder if either of these chaps ever went to America before developing the game. I mean, maybe they did. I don't know.
Not that I know of. They were based in England and then in Scotland during the 1990s, and I don't think they moved to America until shortly before the release of Grand Theft Auto 3. So that would have been 2001 or so. But since then, they've lived in America, most of the time. And so I think they were based in Brooklyn for a very long time. And I think Dan Houser now lives in Los Angeles. So again, they've kind of had a long-term fascination with American life, American culture. And now they are essentially Americans with how long they've lived there. And, with regards to GTA and kind of, you mentioned this fascination, this British fascination and maybe abhorrence with America. Sam Houser famously said in an interview that GTA wouldn't exist without America. America is the only place where GTA would work. It has a huge car culture. It has larger than life figures. And most importantly, it has lots and lots of guns.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. It is an inherently American game, and just it works well with the world they're depicting. But let's talk a little bit about the history that whether or not they were informed by films. By the time we get to GTA San Andreas, which is being developed, I'm presuming in the early aughts, late 90s, they are drawing on some real history here, which is quite fascinating to think about. Again, speaking as a child of the 90s myself, a lot of this stuff is stuff I grew up, listening to the music, watching the films, watching this stuff on TV. The game, as mentioned, is set in the early 1990s Los Angeles, a time and place that is synonymous with gangs, gang warfare, police brutality. You've got films like Colors, which is released in 1988, Boys in the Hood, modern classic, released in 91. The not quite as good Menace to Society, which was released in 1993, but they all depict this sort of zeitgeist of this is an era where LA is synonymous with gang culture. And you play this gang member, CJ, who's part of this gang called the Grove Street Family. Your main rivals are a gang called the Ballers. And the conquest of different territories across Los Santos is a key part of the game. You're fighting the Ballers and other gangs. And this is drawn from the real-life history of a feud between the two main LA-based gangs, the Crips and the Bloods. Their feud goes back to the 1970s when these two rival gangs emerge in LA, principally in South Central Los Angeles. The two men credited with founding the Crips are Raymond Washington and Stanley Tukey Williams. They're both basically juvenile delinquents. They had their own smaller gangs involved in petty theft, burglary. They decide to amalgamate in 1971 to unify into this thing called the Crips, which the name has always been kind of interesting, but it's actually a bastardization of the word cribs, because these were young men who wanted to establish themselves as being youthful, as opposed to the older black gangs in LA, some of which have been around since the 20s. So youth was a big part of these gangs, as well as the distinction of wearing colors, their color being blue Levi jeans, blue jeans jackets, and blue bandanas. And the Crips has become the biggest gang in LA over time. As for the Bloods, they grew out of a confederation of smaller gangs who were basically pissed off about the Crips dominating territories. And they adopted the color red to oppose them. The height of the violence really between these gangs is the 1990s, but it's worth saying that, although the violence has decreased quite a bit into the 21st century, the feud still bubbles on. In 2022, in fact, 6 people were shot in Sacramento in an attack that has been linked to the ongoing Crips-Bloods feud. But really, it's the late 80s, early 90s that's the peak moment of this conflict, and that's what they were looking at when they designed San Andreas. That was the sort of the cultural zeitgeist, the moment. How well do you think they capture this in terms of their depictions of Grove Street, who are basically the equivalent of the Crips? The Ballas are the Bloods. At least that's how I read it. The gang culture stuff is so fundamental to how San Andreas works. What to your mind are some of the ways that they depict this? Are any of the depictions problematic?
Well, I think GTA San Andreas is interesting because, as you'd mentioned before, it's so dependent on those depictions of gang warfare, gang violence from motion pictures, Boys in the Hood being a big one. The Antoine Fuqua movie Training Day with Denzel Washington, that's another huge influence on this game. And then, of course, you have to think back to the music videos from this era. Sam Hauser, in particular, very, very big fan of rap music. We had listed off several albums, several musicians as a big influence on the depiction of gang warfare in this game.
Straight out of Compton, I imagine.
Straight out of
big influence.
NWA, Dr. Dre, Tupac, on and on down the line. And so I think what you're seeing in this game is something that is not necessarily representative of historical research, but is more representative of what Rockstar developers have seen in these movies, in these videos, with maybe some occasional interviews with participants. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I know that Sam Hauser had talked about, being close with some rap musicians who grew up in this area. And then, of course, many of the voice actors in the game came from places like Compton and Long Beach. And so a lot of the slang language that you hear in the game is, I would say, pretty well representative of the type that you would, be familiar with in 1990s Los Angeles, or if you're familiar at all with 1990s rap. I don't know how many kids these days are listening to that, but it's kind of a good.
Funnily enough, I've had students come up to me and say, were you alive when Dr. Dre was a big thing? Which makes me feel terrific about myself. But no, I think that stuff has kind of come back. Like gangster rap seems to be something that young kids listening to. And again, this was stuff that, again, like the Houses, this was stuff I was listening to when I was younger in the 90s. And so it's interesting when you say that it's not necessarily the authentic history, but it's the depiction, it's the gang culture, it's the presentation of that life in popular culture that is informing them. Because when I played San Andreas, I just felt at home. I was like, wow, this is exactly this was my 1990s, basically, just laid out here. The soundtrack is astonishing. Like, it's amazing. It's absolutely perfect. Everything about it is perfect. It's a work of art in some respects in capturing this sort of this cultural moment. But there is some interesting bits of history that do creep into the game that are legit history and pretty dark history from recent American times. And one of them is the history of the crack epidemic. So for those unaware, and hopefully a lot of people are unaware of what crack cocaine is, it's a more potent and addictive form of cocaine. It's made by the process of cooking cocaine down to its base form, cutting it into crystals, and then smoking it. To make crack, you need a lot of cocaine in powdered form to cook it down. And in the 1980s, one of the biggest suppliers of cocaine in the US was probably the CIA. And I say probably because there are still aspects of this story that are contested, but what has been established in the 1986 congressional investigation, led by a young senator called John Kerry, and books including the investigative journalist Gary Webb's 1998 Dark Alliance, is that during the 1980s, the CIA was backing the Contras, so anti-communist guerrillas in Nicaragua, who were fighting the Marxist Sandinistas there. The way in which they backed them was to ship them weapons in exchange for purchasing cocaine. That cocaine was then distributed by CIA into Los Angeles, principally through young black men who are in the ghetto. So it's on the streets of LA that this cocaine is turned into crack. And again, to tie into the cultural references, if anyone wants a fictionalized history, but still a really engaging fictionalized history of this, I highly recommend the TV series Snowfall. It's really good for capturing all the ins and outs of this story, which is an astonishing story. Point is, crack cocaine becomes highly addictive. I mean, it is highly addictive. It's designed to be so. It's sold cheaply. It sweeps like wildfire of utter misery through these already quite deprived communities in South Central Los Angeles, in particular in the 1980s. And the right to deal crack across different city blocks of LA is a big part of why the Crips and the Bloods and other gangs start fighting. It's for possession of territories to distribute. This comes through, and I disclaimer here, I'm working off memory. It's a very entrenched memory because God knows how many hours I spent playing this game, but I have not played San Andreas for a long time. But I do seem to remember that as CJ, you encounter people who are basically strung out on crack. I don't think they ever mention crack or cocaine in the game, though. I could be wrong about that.
The references to crack, I think, come later in the game. I have recently replayed San Andreas. They came out with a definitive edition a few years ago.
That was garbage, wasn't it? From what I read.
Not great, but at least it runs on modern machines, so that makes it a little bit easier to tolerate. But the references to crack really come in at the later stages of the game after you've come into contact with some of the corrupt police officers and also corrupt government agents. You'd made a reference there to the CIA. James Woods, the famous Hollywood actor, plays a corrupt government agent that has you dealing drugs at a certain point in the game. But the references to crack come in, especially with the final mission, which sees you robbing a police SWAT vehicle and slamming it into what's called the Crack Fortress, where the main enemies of the game are, taking drugs, developing into crack, and then selling it on the streets. And as far as the game's kind of position on this history, the Grove Street gang, they have a very negative view of drugs by and large compared to the other players, the other kind of antagonists in the game. So for instance, CJ's family, at one point they have you go out and attempt to eliminate crack dealers because it's weakening your gang because of the influence of the drug. So that's kind of one stand that they make. But, by and large, GTA San Andreas is it's an interesting game because it largely tries to avoid the really hard issues, I think, that were at play here, issues of systemic racism, issues related to, urban planning and the creation of ghettos, purposeful creation of ghettos, and then also the perspective of marginalized groups. When the riots start in the game, it tends to be the case that the player character and then also the non-player characters, they tend to blame the people in the ghetto for the riots. And not really kind of taking a moment and questioning that, what you could call an established approach to rioting and to the drug problem in Los Angeles.
It's a tricky one, isn't it, when you're faced with something as heavy and as complex as the crack, and they have to, to have it in there. They had to have it in there. Yeah. Like there's no way they could avoid it. And you're right, they do take this kind of rosy tinted thing where it's like, well, the Grove Street guys are your guys and they're good guys, which means they say no to crack. It's they're just Nancy. They're just Nancy Reagan about it. But so the crack is one thing. Another thing that comes through quite glaringly in the game is, which reflects the reality of the 1980s in Los Angeles in particular, is that as part of this war between the Crips and the Bloods and other gangs, I keep saying Crips and Bloods, but there are other gangs. I just don't want to run off the whole list because there are quite a few. The gang wars, for crack distribution that are unfolding in the 80s. A big part of it is the glut of cheap guns that come onto the streets of LA. The Tech 9 machine pistol, for example, which is Swedish built in the 1984. It's so cheap. These things are light. You could throw them against the wall and they'll smash. Like they're just cheap plastic. Shipped to the US by the crate load. The Tech 9 becomes a go-to weapon for gangsters in LA, and that's established in reality, and it's also true in the game. It's like one of the first guns you get, basically. You also get an Uzi at some point, which comes from Israel. It's adopted by the U.S. Secret Service during the Cold War, but as a standard issue firearm. But in 1990, the U.S. Secret Service stops using it, and so tons of these Uzis just filter onto the black market in the US, and that comes through in gang violence. Most iconic of all, the AK-47, Soviet-made machine gun, the most rough and ready assault rifle ever made. It's got 8 moving parts. It's cheap, it's reliable, it's powerful. The black market is flooded with these after the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989. And there is an interesting, and this is always stuck in my head. I said before, I haven't played this game forever, but I remember this piece of dialogue really clearly, where you as CJ, you're talking with one of your Confederates, a guy called Big Smoke, and he has this sort of monologue where he says, "Oh, all my life I was told that the Soviets were the bad guys, but now the walls come down, Cold War's over, and we're all friends with the Russians again," which is it's an odd sort of, it's just a kind of nod to, I guess, the transitional moment that this is taking place in the 1990s. And I do think this is one part of the game they handle quite well, is the fact that, as you said before, GTA games are hardwired to have lots of guns in them, but the types of guns that they depict in this game, the fact they're so freely available, it's both, I think, a commentary on the state of gun laws in the US, or lack thereof, but also the fact that this is a moment where the ghettos of LA and other cities are just being flooded with cheap firearms.
Yeah. Yeah, a good friend of mine, Drew McKevitt, I'm going to plug his book here. He's going to love this. But he recently wrote a book called Gun Country that looks at gun issues in the United States, not necessarily as just a cultural issue, but as an issue of economics and marketplaces. And it goes right to the point where you're saying, it's in this kind of post-Cold War era, or, maybe just as the Cold War is ending, where the marketplace is flooded with cheap guns. And it's like, where do they go? Well, it goes to countries where there is endemic conflict, or it goes to places that has very loose gun laws, and that's the United States, right? And so it's kind of like this perfect mix. And so it's like, there is a gun problem, a cultural gun problem in the United States. And I say this as a Texan. There's a cultural gun problem with the United States, but also there's a marketplace problem, right? It's like, where do these guns go? They don't just disappear. People are going to want to make money off these products. Where do they go to sell them? It makes sense to go to places like the US. So, I think, as you rightly point out, the marketplace is flooded with these cheap guns developed during the Cold War, and now flooding the streets. And it leads to a big problem with gang violence, but not just in Los Angeles, right? There was problems, where I grew up in Texas, particularly in Houston and in Dallas. There's problems elsewhere in the U.S., Miami, New York City, etc. So this is not just an LA problem. This is a nationwide problem, and it has a lot to do with American culture, but also, I think economics play a big role in this too.
Yeah. So another bit of darkness that the game captures, and you made reference to it before, is the riots that occur in Los Angeles. The background to which is basically a story of police brutality, or it's the story of police brutality. It's kind of like a foundational point in the long history of police brutality in the United States. Which, and we mentioned NWA before, Straight Outta Compton. They're putting out the song "Fuck the Police," I think, in 1989. Ice-T's band Body Count, they have a song called "Cop Killer" in 1992. Yep. Great album. And it's just like, there's this whole that animus between the gangs of LA and police is very well established. And it's at this point that something unfolds called the Rampart Scandal, which comes to light fully in the late 1990s. Basically, LAPD's Crash Unit, which stands for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, which is just a phenomenal thing to title it.
It sounds very, I can say this because I have a PhD in British history. It sounds very British, actually.
It's Victorian. Street hoodlums. We must gather our resources against the street hoodlums. Yeah. It's their anti-gang unit, and it comes out that as part of the Rampart Scandal, they've been involved in all kinds of corruption, planting evidence, fabricating cases against people, shooting people, covering it all up. There's one officer in particular who's implicated in this, a guy called Officer Rafael Perez, who may have been a member of the Bloods. Again, that's contested, but he's Blood affiliate. And he gave testimony in the Rampart investigation that implicated dozens of other officers, revealed a pattern of abuse that sent innocent people to prison. This Officer Perez fella, he bears a striking resemblance to the main antagonist, I guess, of GTA San Andreas, Officer Frank Tenpenny, who is voiced excellently by Samuel L. Jackson. He's one of the many dodgy cops who you come across in all GTA games. It's a leitmotif of GTA games. There isn't a GTA game without a dodgy cop in. This demonization of the police, we'll just talk about that briefly before we get into Tenpenny. Why do you think that's so fundamental to the GTA franchise?
Well, I mean, it is it's designed to be a satire of American life. And, traditionally, when you have American films, At least early on in the history of films, you had the cops being the good guys. You think of Elliot Ness and the Untouchables. But certainly when you get to the 1970s and, after riots and events in the 1960s, along with things like Watergate, we have this kind of changing opinion of authority in American life. And so you see this being depicted in the major motion pictures of that era. So you have negative portrayals of the police coming from the films of Martin Scorsese, for instance, and you have it coming a bit from the Godfather trilogy as well. And so I think when you talk about where does this come from with regards to GTA, a lot of it comes from American films of the 1970s. And certainly with San Andreas, they are using Boys in the Hood, but particularly also the Denzel Washington movie Training Day. And in Training Day, of course, Denzel Washington character is a very corrupt cop based in part on the Rampart Scandal. And so I think when we talk about San Andreas and the rest of the games in Rockstar's oeuvre, it makes sense, and they're very consistent with this approach. So we've got the dirty cops in San Andreas, Samuel L. Jackson's Tenpenny, Eddie Pulaski played by Chris Penn. But then also you think about the Red Dead series. And so in the Red Dead series, Red Dead 1, you have the Bureau of Investigation, the kind of early version of the FBI. They're dirty cops. But then in Red Dead 2, you have the Pinkerton agents who are just inherently corrupt, being bought out by these business leaders. So I think that is one of the most consistent parts of the Grand Theft Auto series, is a very, shall we say, questioning look at authority and police.
And I will take this moment to make a cheap and gratuitous plug for a previous episode of History's Devils where we discussed Alan Pinkerton, because he is a fascinating font of that distrust of law
100%.
enforcement in the American culture. But Officer Frank Tenpenny, as mentioned, is the manifestation of the corrupt cop, the Rampart Scandal, and the whole shooting match in GTA. And in the game, he goes to trial for I can't remember specifically, but dodgy stuff, and he gets let off. And this engenders a riot across LA, which is incidentally the best bit of the game to play, because it's just shit is just on fire and people are firing and it's just chaos. It's interesting mechanic.
Well, yeah, in terms of game development, I think that's the most interesting segment of a GTA game, right? Is because all of the game's NPCs begin to act out the riot and begin to change their reaction to the player. And so you could just be walking down the street during the riot and could be assaulted. You could be shot at. You could have your car stolen as well. And so it's really fascinating work, not just in depicting a riot, but then also kind of in terms of game development, in the history of that.
I remember spending, like, you're meant to jump to the final mission, but I spent a lot of time just wandering around the streets, getting involved in the riot when I was playing it, because it is just so unique. But anyway, the point is that riot is obviously based on true events. On the night of the 3rd of March, 1991, LAPD stopped a black motorist by the name of Rodney King on the I-210 that runs through LA. He'd been drinking. He tried to outrun him, and they pulled him over. It's meant to be a routine traffic stop. Instead, as was infamously captured on a handheld video camera by someone in a nearby house, Rodney King is hauled out of the car. He's beaten repeatedly by several police officers with their batons. This footage went viral before viral was a thing, spread around the world, and it transformed a case of police brutality in Los Angeles into this massive national debate over race relations, police powers, and as mentioned before, it for people who are already looking askew from beyond the US's borders at the US, it was a kind of what the fuck moment. It was a my God, what is this place sort of thing. The trial that followed was equally sensational. Like Frank Tenpenny in GTA, 2 of the LAPD officers accused of excessive force against King, they're acquitted. Two are found guilty, but 2 are acquitted. And so on the 29th of April, 1992, this great sense of injustice explodes across the streets of LA, and we get these riots. Now, it should be said that just before this trial, the Crips and the Bloods broker a truce called the Watts Truce, which was mainly a response to this idea that the police are our enemy and we need to unite and kind of watch each other's backs. And so it proved, because there was, I think, 6 or 7, about a week or so of unrest across Los Angeles, fires, violence, clashes between residents and police. Over 50 people die, hundreds more are injured, over 1,000 arrests are made, the National Guard is called out. There are 2 things I remember watching on TV as a child and thinking, and not understanding what it was, but looking at it and going, oh, wow, this is big. I don't fully understand it, but this is clearly a big thing. The first thing was the fall of the Berlin Wall, watching people jumping up and down on big slabs of concrete. I was going, I don't know what this is, but it's clearly important. And the second was the LA riots. I remember watching the footage on TV. There was one clip in particular is tattooed into my brain of a guy who hauls someone out of a cab of a truck and his mate pitches a rock at their head. That was replayed Christ knows how many times, just over and over and over again. You remember any of this? Are you old enough, young enough to remember this?
Yeah, I think I was 9 when the LA riots occur, and very similar reaction, and not really understanding the context until much later. And, it's one of these important flashpoints in 1990s America, along with the O.J. Simpson trial, where it's kind of a reckoning with race. It's a reckoning with race relations, particularly in urban settings, where we have these kind of red line walls that, kind of create ghettos on purpose. And what are the repercussions of that? And I think the game it does kind of stay in line with the negative reaction to police corruption that you would see in the real world, but also the game it kind of punches down a little bit. I can, having replayed the game recently, San Andreas, it takes a moment to blame the rioters for the problems, which is not precisely fair, I would say. But then also it kind of undercuts its own social commentary, which kind of it makes sense for a video game, but maybe not for like a serious piece of historical literature. So for instance, right after the 10-penny acquittal is announced in the game, you and your brother, CJ's brother, go out into the street to go towards a mission. And so you've had this moment of kind of semi-serious social commentary about the riots, about police corruption. But then CJ begins to joke about another character's addiction to masturbation. So it's kind of like one of these moments where it's like, oh yeah, right, I'm in a video game, right? It's like we have this stand-in character, a couple of musicians from Manchester, stand-ins, I think, for Oasis. And one of them is a chronic masturbator and masturbates in almost every scene that he's in. And so there's a joke about that in the midst of these major riots that are going on. So it's kind of like one of these moments like, well, GTA as a series, it's tackling more adult themes, it's dealing with satire, but also it's still kind of a video game.
Yeah, and a louche video game at that. I completely forgot about that character. That's now. No, you're right. It was a sort of Oasis critique.
Yeah,
that's funny. What a weird way to depict a British musician.
I agree.
It's one out of left field. But yeah, as you say, though, it is something that it becomes the focal point of the game. It's the climax of the game, and I think that's the important bit is that they do recognize the houses. They recognize that this is something that we can use as the climax of this game, where you, of course, you emerge triumphant because you're CJ and you're the hero and everything else. And that's kind of that. I now want to flip forward to GTA 5 because it's stark to think about these two things in contrast, because GTA 5 is released in 2013, I think, from memory.
Yep.
So we are a good decade or so along from San Andreas. And in terms of the timeline, we are still in Los Santos. We are still in San Andreas. The gangs are still there. Police corruption is still there. Crime is still king. But there are some really interesting nuances in how the houses are depicting this world, which says a lot about what has changed in America and perhaps what has not changed since the 1990s. One thing that's was unique about GTA 5 is that you can now play as 3 protagonists, and they are far more complex characters than CJ. You can play as Mike, who is a washed-up bank robber, sort of middle-aged white guy, unhappy marriage, expanding waistline, drinks too much. He's basically a manifestation of male midlife crisis. That's him. Mike's friend slash enemy, Trevor, is a psychotic, murderous, comedic madman. Both he and Mike, I think, represent the extent to which masculinity has been interrogated since the 1990s. You know, this is not, we're not doing Schwarzenegger and Stallone killing everyone and smoking a cigar and grabbing the hot chick and running off anymore. These are two very broken men. And they are depicted as such. They are depicted as these deeply flawed men that they can't control their emotions. They lash out violently. They're both a bit helpless in certain ways. And then the third guy you can play is Frank, who is this young black guy. He's affiliated with the Grove Street gang, but unlike CJ, he's not a hostage to life in the ghetto. In fact, he openly rejects it. He's kind of there's this thing about, you know, Grove Street for life, which was a thing in San Andreas. Very early in the game, Frank's like, I don't do that shit. You know, I'm an aspirational young black guy. He's cynical about America. He wants to make money. He wants to get ahead. These are very nuanced characters compared to the, you know, gangbangers and corrupt cops we've got in San Andreas. And to me, they represent a more complex, perhaps more cynical sort of post-2008, post-global financial crisis America, because the stories you take these men through are really strong on critiquing not just capitalism, but white-collar crime, tech bro culture, people's obsession with the stock market. How does that come through in the game? And to what extent do you think that might reflect, dare I say, maturing of the house's views?
Yeah, I think instead of, you know, what we might say is the satire, general satire of the previous Grand Theft Auto games, it becomes much more focused in GTA 5. And thankfully, I think GTA 5 also finds the Housers punching down less often with regards to their satire. They're more often punching up. So I think that kind of takes a more mature approach. And, you know, throughout the GTA series, there's always been this kind of fascination with white collar crime. You know, a big part of the storylines in San Andreas, but particularly Vice City, is real estate based crime. And so there's always some scheming white developer who's always trying to get you to firebomb competing business or competing property to raise or lower the rates for real estate. And so that's a huge part of GTA 5 as well, where you can manipulate real estate by perpetrating crimes. And the same thing goes for the stock market, right? So in the game, you can assassinate CEOs of major businesses to drop their stock prices, right?
Isn't there like a Mark Zuckerberg guy who you blow his head off with a mobile phone bomb or something?
Yes. Very, very disturbing. Yeah. But it's kind of making the point, and I think this is maybe something that recommends Grand Theft Auto. It's kind of making the point that, you know, American life is awash with this type of white collar corruption, but nobody seems to be really doing anything about it. So in that kind of context, what counts as crime? Right. And it kind of gives a cover for the player character to commit some of the crimes that they are. It's like these people are out in the open committing crime and they're well respected. They've got money, they've got influence. And so what is it to really commit crime against them? Is that a crime? Right. It's kind of implicitly making that argument.
Yeah. Trevor in particular has some really good lines to that, which are juxtaposed to the fact that he seems like a kill crazy maniac, but then he has these kind of insightful moments where he sort of critiques capitalism. And there's one bit where I think he's like torturing someone or something, and he says, you know, trickle down economics is bullshit. It's just it's very funny. And again, you know, commentary on trickle down economics, that's kind of punching up to your point.
Yes.
Even if it's done in a ridiculous way, it's punching up. And that thing of the global financial crisis, and I guess that what you were just describing, which is almost like a nihilism, I guess, is it hangs over GTA 5, but so do the US's failed military efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's a plot line through GTA 5 there's this feud that Trevor, Mike, and Frank have with a private security firm called Merryweather, which is Blackwater. It's the fictional depiction of Blackwater, which, for those who are not aware, Blackwater is a private security agency employed by the U.S. government in Iraq, principally. Became notorious for committing war crimes there, and so you get this Merryweather Blackwater analog that turns up, and they're operating on U.S. soil, which is something which is commented on in the game. As you know, these guys aren't meant to operate on U.S. soil. What is this? There's also the most controversial scene in probably maybe in the whole series. It certainly got a lot of eyebrows raised, where in the guise of Trevor, because he's always at the center of the most perverse stuff, you torture someone very graphically, including waterboarding them, which is obviously an allusion to Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. These critiques of U.S. foreign policy and practices in the war on terror in GTA 5, they feed into that general disillusionment with the American dream that permeates the game. A lot of cynicism about federal agencies, the militarization of law enforcement, and the idea that economically, legally, and societally, 21st century America is a rigged system. And this is to your point, like that you are playing these guys who have basically seen the system, gone, it's rigged, so fuck it. We'll just kind of do what we want. And I think a really interesting distinction is that you're not sort of raging against the machine. You're cynically exploiting it to make your way in the world. You know, you're rigging the stock market, as you say. That's a mechanic of the game. Robbing banks and government buildings is a core part of the game. Playing the fictionalized versions of the FBI and the CIA off one another is a core part of the game. It's pretty edgy stuff. Did Rockstar get into any trouble for this?
I think it's interesting because the biggest controversy that Rockstar had to deal with was the hot coffee mod for San Andreas, which for listeners who may not know, this was a sex mini game that was placed into San Andreas by the developers, insisted upon by Sam Houser in particular, who wanted to deal with more adult themes in the game. And so from his perspective, it made sense to include depictions of sex. And so this didn't get past the ratings board, right? So games ratings, they were hoping to have Grand Theft Auto San Andreas rated as a mature game, but instead with the sex mini game included, it was getting an adults only rating, which would significantly limit the number of people who could purchase the game, without providing ID and everything like that. And so what the Housers did was that for the review committee, they removed the sex mini game from the game, but they left it internally into the game's code. And so when the game came out, a group of modders in the Netherlands, they essentially jailbroke the game, discovered it, and then, were posting videos and images of it online and describing how PC players of the game could mod the game and access hot coffee themselves. So this led to a huge controversy related to this, especially a witch hunt led by Jack Thompson, a Florida attorney in the United States. And so that was kind of the biggest controversy. But the Trevor torture scene, this is something that was controversial, was the topic of multiple op-eds in the New York Times and Times Magazine, et cetera, all the places you would expect. But it didn't lead to any censoring of the game. It didn't lead to this kind of great crusade. And I would almost say that it's kind of a moment where you realize how desensitized culture has become at that point. And, to put it into context, Trevor's torture scene debuts in 2013. But by that point, American audiences had already watched Kiefer Sutherland in the Fox series 24 committing torture after torture for a decade by that point on U.S. television, one of the most popular TV shows in the U.S. So I think it is one of these moments where I think the Housers are actually doing some good work satirizing America. But I think in the torture scene and the kind of lack of controversy related to that, it's kind of showing how much things have changed with culture, with video games, and with depictions of violence.
Which leads us on to what I want to finish off with, which is a discussion of Grand Theft Auto 6, the long-awaited, going to make a $1 squillion latest installment. They will not be getting a penny off me because Sony are not going to release a physical copy of this. They want you just to.
You're taking a stand. Okay.
These people can get fucked. I am
okay.
not. I
Fair
am.
enough.
I am. Give
Fair
me
enough.
my physical media. I'm a physical media zealot. So
Fair
I'm not
enough.
going to be playing. And part of the reason I'm not is it's not just because I think it's inherently bad that Sony are phasing out physical media. I know what I'm going to expect, what it's going to be because it's a GTA game. But there is a part of me that is curious about playing the game because I know what I'm going to get from an entertainment experience. What I'm curious about is the fact that GTA 6 will be the first GTA game since 2016. It's set in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It ties back to the original GTA Vice City game released in 2002, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
GTA Vice City was set in a sort of Miami Vice version of 1980s Florida, references to Scarface, stuff like that. Fun, pretty safe, stuff that happened in the past. GTA 6 is going to be set in Donald Trump's America.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be set in the very state where Donald Trump holds court at Mar-a-Lago. The game will be informed by Trump World, and Trump World, by any objective assessment, is a place where things are so dark and ludicrous that it's kind of beyond satire.
Mm-hmm.
And the question for Rockstar Games, given their long history of satirizing violence, race relations, crime, government overreach in America, how will they handle this? How will they satirize the self-parody that is Donald Trump's America?
Yeah, I mean, I think my feeling on this is satire dead, right? Is satire dead in Trump's America? And I think in a lot of ways, particularly living in Texas, in a lot of ways, America has almost become a version of America in Grand Theft Auto, kind of a funhouse mirror version of America. And so I'm very curious how the satire will work because it has to be there. It has to be there. But also, I think in terms of the Housers, this is going to be the first game that doesn't include Dan Houser as a writer, right? So Dan Houser left Rockstar in 2020, maybe while they were beginning development of this game, but certainly not during the kind of major part of development. So Dan Houser is a critical figure for the kind of satire that we've seen, the sarcasm that we've seen in the series up to this point. And so what is that going to look like without him as a major figure? And so those are kind of my biggest questions. I think there's definitely some directions they can go. You've seen, I don't know if you've seen the trailers so far, but it looks like they're doing a lot of satire related to social media, to influencers and the like. And then of course the game's set in Florida. And speaking as an American, I'm very aware of how people from Europe view America. Well, the way in which people from Europe look at America, that's how Americans look at Florida, right? That is where the crazy stuff happens. So I'm curious. I'm just full of questions, and I don't have your aversion to playing digital only games, so I will be there on day one, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, it would be great to play it and see, but I don't see myself doing it. But you're right, like that question of what are they going to focus on? And now that you've said that, I didn't think about that before, but the trailers do indicate that they're going to look at a lot of social media critique and influencers and the sort of zaniness of, Florida man, I've got a gator in my backyard, that sort of thing. And that does make me wonder if they are going to perhaps sidestep some of the bigger issues because, and this was something I talked about with Tor Olson in a previous episode when we were discussing Red Dead. And he mentioned about how the trick with GTA 6 is the big problem they face is that they're going to have to sell this game to a divided America. You can't go in all guns blazing saying, we hate Trump and we, You can't really present the game that way. That's going to be interesting. I wonder if they'll perhaps. So I said that because I correct me if I'm wrong, but Donald Trump has appeared in GTA games in the form of a guy called Donald Love, right? He was basically a Trump analog, I think.
Yeah, a little bit. And, he plays into the persistent real estate angle for the Grand Theft Auto games. I almost feel like you could write a whole book about the depiction of real estate in the Grand Theft Auto series. I'm only half joking. I'm only half joking.
No, because it is built into a lot of the crimes that you commit, and I'm sure it'll be a part of the Florida. I mean, this was Florida was one of the hubs for the GFC with sort of speculation on properties and things like that. Like that's probably going to play in as well. But as I say, later this year, I think that's releasing. I think unless they delay it again, they're forever releasing it.
And very quickly, the very first GTA game with a non-optional female protagonist. So kind of one of the consistent criticisms of Dan Houser in particular is misogynistic worldview. And so how does that change now that he's gone? And I think we get a signaling of that a little bit with Rockstar, including Lucia as a playable character. So we'll see.
Which even that, is going to piss some people off.
Oh, of course.
Something as innocuous as that. Can you imagine if it's also resplendent with critiques of Trump and, some fictional depiction of Mar-a-Lago, one wonders. But that's speculation for down the line. Bob, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of History's Devils. Where can people find you? Are you a social media person? Do you have things to plug?
I used to be, but not very often on there. I'm on Blue Sky at Whitaker Almanac, and then History Respawn. This is my podcast and YouTube series, which I may return to at some point, but not while I'm writing a book. So we'll see.
Wise.
I'll see you down the trail.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you, dear listener. Do continue to like, subscribe, comment, smash buttons, do all the things that you're meant to do. And we will see you next time for another edition of History's Devils.